You heard his name mentioned so often during the recent Ontario election campaign, you'd swear his name was on the ballot. It actually wasn't. But his report offering a path to a balanced budget was a much discussed part of campaign 2014. And with that, we welcome Don Drummond, the Matthews Fellow in Global Public Policy at Queen's University and author of the eponymously named Drummond Report. Welcome back to TVO.
Thank you very much.
You've been laying low for the whole election campaign, right?
Well, it was a very interesting period for me because you said you heard my name a lot. I was reading it every day, sometimes inaccurately, I think. But no, I decided to say absolutely nothing, and I kept my part.
Well, we're glad you're breaking your silence tonight because it was interesting that both the Liberals and the Conservatives, in some respects, presented themselves to the electorate as the team better able to implement what you recommended. What did you make of all that?
Well, you know, I don't think there was, in terms of the report and the financial dimension, I don't think there was any difference really between the three because they all embraced the notion of balancing the budget by 2017 and 18. And
well, Tories a year faster.
Yeah, I feel you're faster, but the NDP 2017-18 and didn't announce any austerity measures, no cuts. But how are you going to do that? So all they did is, we'll create a separate minister responsible for the savings. Guess where they're going to find the savings? I mean, there's a finite number as a way of doing it. It may not be exactly what I had in the report, but I bet over time they too would have ended up doing some things that are pretty similar to what I recommended.
Just to remind everyone, is it 2.5 years ago already you brought that report out?
It was February 2012.
Yeah, 2.5 years ago, you brought this report out offering a roadmap to get to a balanced budget. You were told by the Liberals you can't recommend tax increases, but you also can't study a few other things. Show us how to get there. How much of the report, because I presume you've checked back in with it, how much has the government actually implemented?
Well, my point of reference came in February of 2013, so exactly a year after it was implemented. And they invited me in, they showed me a spreadsheet, and it had all the 362 recommendations, categorically rejected, categorically accepted, what had been done, and why it hadn't been done. And they added it up at the bottom and said 60% had been implemented. And I was skeptical, and I looked at it really closely, and I agreed. In fact, there was a few areas that I thought they could have given themselves credit. Now, that 60% in the election campaign has become 80%. I haven't seen the update from the 60 to 80. Not all the recommendations are of equal weight, though, and some of the bigger, weightier ones are in the 20% that haven't been done.
Well, that's what I wanted to figure out. Does the 80% refer to the number of recommendations or the dollar value of those recommendations?
Well, I'll deal with this two separately. It's 80% of the 362 recommendations. But the dollar value, if you look at the parameters to get to the balanced budget that were in the last budget, they're bang on what the Commission recommended. But do the policies line up to support that? That we don't know yet because, you know, you're Minister X and they say, well, you're going to get a 0.5% increase in the next 5 years. That's what's shown in the budget. But do you, as Minister X, have a plan to deliver 0.5%? Maybe not.
We'll see. One of the things that your silence that I found particularly frustrating was that I would have loved to have had Don Drummond at this set during the election campaign as a kind of a truth commissioner for all of the plans that were out there. And I want to do some of that right now because the Liberals, of course, introduced a budget which ultimately did not pass that, among other things, called for some pretty serious tax increases on very high-income people, $29 billion infrastructure plan, indexing the minimum wage, wage increases for personal support workers, no corporate tax increases, no 100,000 layoffs, unlike what the Tories have on offer, but some pretty serious spending cuts coming down the road. And I guess my question is, what's your overall assessment of that budget?
Well, certainly it dug the hole somewhat deeper, not infinitely deeper. Some of the things like the infrastructure, now you can cost that out over the life of the infrastructure, so it no longer hits you right up front. Didn't cut the corporate income tax, but that wasn't in the plan before, so that didn't cost them any addition. But they did keep with the end point. It's just that it's going to be harder now to, after having spent more money in the first 2 years, to subsequently rein it back. And again, I'm not quite sure all the plans are in place to do that.
That's my question. Can you get to a balanced budget by 17-18, given what you know is going to be in this budget, which will be reintroduced on the 14th, I think, of July? Do you think they can do it?
Unambiguously, you can do it. And we've had the lesson. Every single government proved the lesson in the 1990s. Every government in Canada can restrain expenditures in extreme fashion between 2 and, in the case of Saskatchewan, 7 years, somewhere in that period. And then if they don't do it, quote unquote, properly, it blows up in their face. The first part's not that hard. You just starve everything. And particularly like healthcare, just say, that's it. You're getting a 2% increase. Education is going to be flat. My whole thing about the commission, I didn't think it was all about numbers. It was about, can you run the programs efficiently so you can keep the cost increases down but deliver a quality of service? I can take 10% out of somebody's budget and the service quality can all fall apart. I'll get the number and you can sustain that for a while, but that's not what I was trying to get at. That's the tougher test, I think.
Can you make a political evaluation as to whether or not you think this government is capable of going from an $800 million program spending increase this year to an $800 million program spending cut 2 years from now? Can they do that?
I think they can do it, but it's really a tough mindset that has to sweep through the government. You know, a lot's been made about the new expanded role of the Treasury Board, and that's really the litmus test. The funniest thing that happened to me when I started the commission, they handed me 3 4-inch D-ring binders. Now, I was familiar with 3-inch D-ring binders. I did not know there was such a thing as a 4-inch D-ring binder. They were all Treasury Board submissions, and they wanted me to read them. And fortunately for me, they were almost the same submission. The same submission kept coming to Treasury Board time after time with no decision. Well, you got to change that, and you got to make the tough decisions. It can be done, but there's a whole infrastructure, and all the government's going to be working in unison to pull that off.
Okay, that's the Liberals. Again, had you been here during the election campaign, I would have wanted to know what you thought of the math in the Conservatives' Million Jobs plan. What did you think?
Well, first of all, as they acknowledge themselves, about half of that was just the normal growth in the economy. Unambiguously, there was a mathematical error. I know, I used to do these, we call them shock minus control experiments. You get a printout from the computer. It shows employment changes by 20,000, 20,000, 20,000. Well, that's 20,000 positions, not 20,000 new jobs every year. Unambiguously, they added them up over the year. The surprising thing is, okay, you make a mistake with a number, admit it. And the irony is, the number that Jack Mintz, the head of the School of Public Policy in Calgary, had without a mathematical error was almost as high as their number with a mathematical error. So I was just thinking, okay, admit you made a mathematical error, switch from the American Enterprise quote that you had before to Jack Mintz's, you're good, go on. But they didn't do that.
And again, if you want to create 1 million jobs, does it pass the Drummond sniff test to say we're also going to eliminate 100,000 positions from the public service at the same time?
Well, first of all, it's extremely dubious saying you're going to create 1 million jobs. In Ontario, we are the quintessential small open economy. Where the U.S. economy and a few others goes, Ontario, you don't have a lot of control over that. But you don't have any control of the breakdown between overall growth, what goes to capital, what goes to labor. You can't control that. Now, the 100,000 is the part that probably, I guess, miffed me the most, because a lot of people would say that's coming from the Drummond Commission. We said the opposite. We said, don't be driven by ideology. Don't pick an arbitrary number. Look at every single business line and figure out the most efficient way of doing it. If a public sector unionized group is the best at doing the high technology diagnostics, a hospital group on a value-added cost base, why not? Who cares? You know, we're not going to feel better just because that's in the private sector, but if a private sector can deliver, better go. And, you know, the 100,000, who knows? The Liberal plan by 2017, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that involved the public sector. That was about 100,000 lower. I hope it doesn't come because they arbitrarily picked that number and are going to oppose it. If it comes through a careful analysis, what's the best way of delivering efficient, high-quality public services? So be it.
Can I make sure I heard you right there? You're saying, or are you saying, that if the Liberals are to achieve the spending targets that they have put in their own budget, which call for pretty dramatic program spending cuts in the years ahead, they may also shed 100,000 jobs in the process?
Well, it might. I mean, you've got certain cost drivers, health being the number one. You've got population, you've got aging, there's technological advances. Very, very hard to sustain that at the current 2% for a very long period of time. You've got the cost of inflation. You're even at best going to get wages for the civil servants flat for a couple of years, not forever. How do you get program spending to almost be flat? Well, there has to be fewer civil servants. I think that's a fairly math, but you don't go out on some crusade and arbitrarily say, here's the number it's going to be. But, you know, just take Service Ontario right now. Service Ontario was almost half delivered by the private sector, almost half by the public sector. Would I be shocked by 2017 if that has shifted to 2/3 or 3/4? Not at all. But that's not a loss of 100,000 jobs.
No,
that's a transfer from the public sector to the private sector. And that got missed by a lot of people, I think.
That's actually what Tim Hudak was saying.
Yeah.
For much of that 100,000
But,
jobs.
you know, so how can you create 1 million when you're costing 100,000? Well, that probably wasn't explained very well.
Two options also out there on offer. One was the Conservatives were going to freeze everybody's wages in the broader public sector, pass a law doing it. The Liberals is collectively bargain yourselves, knock yourselves out, but there's no more money. Which is the better approach?
Well, I don't like the wage freeze option because I think you want really high quality civil servants. You want an attached, driven, motivated public sector. You don't get that when you arbitrarily come in. It's the overall wage bill. And again, you got to look at get rid of operations and procedures you don't know. Don't go after the individuals, but there's a whole bunch of things you do, or you do really badly, you can get out of them. Well, business subsidies, I guess, was my favorite one, although ironically, that's the one that they've added to in the budget with another new plan. I didn't find any of the business subsidies working very well. And if you take the direct spending plus the tax preferences, $4.2 billion right there. That would, if you go after that and get rid of the stuff that's not working, you could save a fair bit of money.
And yet Stephen Harper, the other day in the province of Ontario announced, I can't remember the number now, it's over $10 million worth of subsidies to businesses that are already doing profitable.
You know, what everybody forgets, you take that $4.2 billion, you have to tax somebody to pay for that. And in fact, you have to tax about $6 billion because there's an administrative cost as well. So yeah, maybe the $4.2 billion of business subsidies is creating some jobs, but how many did you cost by the $6 billion? No one ever looks at it that way.
We may be getting a Made in Ontario pension plan coming forward, if in fact the Ontario government makes good on its commitment. The Tories said there would be an enormous cost to the job creation capacity of the Ontario economy to have this Made in Ontario, what do they call it? Ontario Registered Pension Plan. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I'll declare a bias on this because I've been at this particular point for a very long period of time. I think the flaw with the Canada pension plans that starts right now is the maximum insurable earnings cuts out at too low a level. It cuts out as you barely get into the middle income class, and beyond that, you just get a fixed amount from the thing. If you look back at the studies that was done for the finance ministers, federally and provincially, and everybody says it said our pension plans are okay. It actually didn't say that. It said middle to upper middle income that do not have a company pension plan do not have adequate savings. Well, guess what they got cut out at? They got cut out by where the Canada pension plan peaks out. So I've always said it's a surgical need here. The surgery is just raise that maximum point, and that's essentially what Ontario's done. The shame is it's not done for everybody across Canada through the Canada pension plan. Maybe ultimately it will be. So I like the spirit of where they're going. And yeah, you can call it a tax increase, and I'll sound too much like a former bureaucrat. It's a premium increase. It's not a tax, and it's not for everybody. If you're below the middle income, it's not going to affect you, and if you're high income, it doesn't affect you.
Tories said during the campaign they had a document from the Ministry of Finance in Ontario that putting in this new pension plan would cost 150,000 jobs across the province. True or false?
Again, who knows of these things? It's possible over a longer period of time, but there's another side to it too. What's the cost of having people middle to upper income retire with an inadequate support and require some additional government support later on?
Corporate income taxes. The Liberals are freezing them in this upcoming budget. Tories would have cut them a lot. What's the best prescription for our economy right now?
Well, as an economist, this is a frustrating area because if you ask any economist 15 or 20 years, what does Ontario or Canada need to be competitive? Everyone would have said, lower our really high corporate income taxes, get rid of the capital tax, change the retail sales tax, which hit business inputs, to a value-added tax. Well, guess what?
We did all that. Exactly, we did it all.
And 10 or 15 years ago, they would have said business investment would take off and this would pay back. It didn't take off. Was the idea wrong? I'm not sure. Ontario taxation of corporation is competitive. It's not the lowest in the world, and if you took it to 8% of the Conservatives, it'd be really, really attractive, but it's way below the U.S. already, our main competitor. That's because the U.S. taxes are so high. Part of me says, hey, I haven't seen the proof that the first action, which costs a lot of money, has really worked. How about you businesses getting to spend some, and then maybe we'll consider another step.
In our last minute, Mr. Drummond, I wonder if you would give the current Premier, who's now been elected, and the Minister of Finance some advice.
Well, I'll borrow from a speaker at a session I was at quite recently about another report I did 5 years ago on labor market information. And almost nothing has been done in that last 5 years. And the speaker had an opportunity to sum up 3 pieces of advice for Minister Kenny in the employment area. And his 3 pieces of advice were implement Drummond, implement Drummond, implement Drummond. So I will say the same thing. This report from February 2012, implement it.
Because it's still out there and there's still 20% of the recommendations that can be done.
Hey, if there's a better idea, I'll be the first to congratulate us a better idea, but I think the answers are some variant of what we looked at 2 years ago.
Good enough. It's good of you to come in and visit us at TVO tonight.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much. Don Drummond.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.